Hello, everybody, and welcome to another special edition of The Breakthrough Show. My name is Jessica Dugas, intuitive mentor and hostess of this show, and I am so glad to see you guys back here. It's been a few weeks since we've been on. As you know, I've been traveling and dealing with stuff in my personal world, and I just want to take just a quick moment and thank everybody for all of your well wishes and emails and messages. You guys are awesome, and I just appreciate you so much, and I am so excited and pumped up to be back for a special edition today with my very awesome guest who is on with us today. So Dr. Brian Keating is a cosmologist, and you may be thinking of another word, but I'm going to let him talk about that in a minute. He is a distinguished professor of physics at the Center for Astrophysics and Space Sciences at the University of California, San Diego, where he studies and I had to write this down so I wouldn't forget it, the cosmic microwave background and its relationship to the origin and evolution of the universe. This is interesting stuff, guys, for those of you who like the rabbit hole like me. He is the author of the book called Losing the Nobel Prize and has received numerous awards in his field. Brian, I am so excited to have you on today. Thank you for being here.
It's an honor to be with you, Jessica. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So tell everybody a little bit, maybe in better words, what exactly is it that you do, that you study?
So I am a cosmologist, as you so aptly put it, which does not mean I study hair and makeup, but it does mean that I study the cosmos, and the prefix cosmos originates from the same Greek word, which means beauty or face. And in the case of cosmetologist, it's obvious why that would be the name. But in the case of cosmologist, we study the beautiful face that the cosmos presents to us. And it's my privilege to be able to do that with some of the brightest human beings who've ever lived on all of the 7 continents on Earth. And quite frankly, there's no better job on Earth or in the universe that I know about, because what we get paid to do is to explore what the nature of matter and energy and the universe is really all about. And that's our day-to-day job. We do that using telescopes that we have to build. There's one flashing in and off of my shirt as we speak. And that technology that we build is some of the most advanced ever created by human beings. And we build it and then deploy it to the tops of mountains or to distant reaches of the solar system in some cases. And this is what we do, all in an effort to understand what happened at the very beginning of time, and even to determine if there was a single beginning of time. There may be a certain probability that there could be multiple universes, and multiple universes in both space and perhaps in time as well.
It's interesting. So the picture that I have for you on the graphic for the show, you're in a very, very cold place. Where were you in that picture?
That was in Cleveland, where I was that was at the South Pole. I was thinking of saying that was in San Diego. That's just a normal fall day in San Diego. No, that was taken at the South Pole, Antarctica, where I've been twice to deploy this telescope called Bicep, which is the hero of the story Losing the Nobel Prize.
Interesting. So do you have telescopes and things set up down there, or is that something completely different?
Yeah, the telescope that we had was called Bicep, and it was later evolved into Bicep 2, and then currently it's called Bicep 3, and there's even going to be a 4th generation called Bicep Array. And this is an experiment that I devised with colleagues at Caltech and other places back in 2001 to take the earliest possible baby picture of the universe, namely what the universe might have looked like at the very moment in which time itself essentially came into existence, or certainly as far back as you could go. And the way that we do that is we use telescopes, and telescopes have the advantage of being time machines. That is, when we look out in space, we're looking back in time. When you see the sun right now, you're not seeing it as it is right now. You're seeing the light that left it 8 minutes ago and just got to your eyes as we speak. And so too, if you look where there's no sun in the way, no planet in the way, no galaxies in the way, you could potentially look back to the very first light that there ever was. And that was from a pattern that's called the cosmic microwave background radiation. And that itself is not even the oldest possible light source or the oldest possible matter and energy in the universe. That actually originated about 500,000 years after the Big Bang. So
Wow.
to go further back in time, we need to use a different source of light or radiation, different than any form of electromagnetic light or radiation that you've ever encountered. In fact, we have to use something called gravitational radiation, waves of gravity that perturb the very essence of space and time, and mind-bendingly bend space and bend time as they propagate from the earliest moments of the universe to our telescopes today.
Wow. It blows my mind completely to even think that something like that is possible, to be able to look at something that happened so long ago,
Yeah.
through what we have today. I want to ask you really quickly, so cosmology, how does that compare to astronomy? What's the difference between those two things?
Well, astronomy is not the study of horoscopes. Of course, it's a study of the
Not
asters,
those.
the stars. They, again, it shares a prefix, and there's a reason for that. Astrologers, in reality, astrologers were really the first astronomers, because they needed to understand. They thought the positions of planets determine the fate of human life on Earth, and so they looked at these stars. They tried to construct a logic or a pattern from their movements. And hence the name for that. For us, we could provide laws of motion, not conjectures about human affairs. And so astronomer, is either someone who names the stars or orders the stars. And what we do as astronomers, in contradistinction to cosmologists, is we study essentially all the aspects of the universe that are off of the Earth. So actually, cosmology is a subset of astronomy, and it is standing in relation to it because the biggest thing you could possibly study is all of the entirety of the universe, including its past and potentially its future.
Okay, so then let's look at this then. If you do you see in cosmology, do you feel like anything that you see in that world that you're in affects us here on this earth, as an astrologer would think that it would?
Not in the conventional way, no. So there's no evidence that there are actually astrological effects that can cause effects that can act as causes to life on Earth. And in fact, that goes back to many thousands of years that these conjectures were true. And yet the main objection that scientists have to astrology is that it is not reproducible, it is not testable using the scientific method. And so things that are not testable using the scientific method fall out of the realm of science. So they could be important, they could be, kind of entertaining, they could have value, but it doesn't have a scientific basis that you can use it to then divine true information about all sorts of fates and facts on Earth. And there's various ways to demonstrate why scientists don't believe in astrology, but suffice it to say that astrology in general is quite flexible. I remember once I was out with a relative of mine, and she walked by a fortune teller, and we sat down, and I was just kind of humoring the fortune teller. She asked me some questions about me after she talked to this relative of mine. She then asked me, what's your sign? And I said, I'm an Aries, and blah, blah. I think I'm an Aries. And she went there and she did a whole horoscope about me. And then at the end, I said, you know what? If you're born in September, like your son, what are you? And she's like, oh, you're a Virgo. And I said, yeah. I said, well, actually most of what I said is still applicable. And so the problem with astrology is that there's no real set of evidence that can prove it wrong. In other words, they would not admit to having a falsification of one of their predictions, and they would not subject it to double-blind evidence, etc. So for those reasons, we don't adhere to the predictions of astrologers. That being said, if people do it for fun, entertainment, I'm not going to really go crazy about
it. Yeah. Well, you said something in another interview I saw that I loved, and that was, if a scientist tells you that they know something for sure, that's not scientific.
Yeah.
And I loved that you said that, because I tend to be in a world of they're not all conspiracy theorists, but they have thought. Those of people in my circle, we tend to just think outside of the box. We question a lot of things, and there are many people in the mainstream that will look at us and say, why are you questioning what we know?
Right.
And so that was a big reason for us too, why we homeschool as well, because we wanted our children to be able to ask all the questions and figure things out more for their own, rather than this is the way it is, this is what we know, and ask those questions. So
Right.
what are some things that that you think are important for scientists to know? Why do you think it's important for them not to say that, to say like, okay, we know all the things because this is the way it is?
Actually, I think, mostly what happens with scientists that perpetuate this image that we are infallible seekers of pure truth that have no proclivities, no prejudices, no biases into what we do. I often hear it said that I'm going to prove that such and such took place, or I'm going to, win a Nobel Prize for discovering this thing that was predicted. And oftentimes it really betrays the true essence of science, which is to be surprised, and it is to try to disprove things, not to prove things. There's no such thing as settled science, whether it's, evolution. And believe me, I believe in evolution. I believe in climate change. I believe in all these things. But to say that something is settled science is simply patently wrong. It's an expression to appeal to authority and to appeal to, to the majority, that you say that 99% believe it's completely unchangeable forever, because the history of science teaches us to be humble, and that humility should be gleaned from episodes where scientists thought at various times very ludicrous notions about how the universe was structured, just in my field alone, ranging from, the earth being the center of a finite universe to an infinite universe existing for all time. We don't know the answer. And what happens over time is that we get more and more data, and we should change our minds as more data comes in. We hope that the data are getting more and more precise. In other words, that we hope we have bounded the actual answer. We say the earth is the center of the solar system. Well, no, that's not right. And then we go out and say, well, actually the sun is the center of the solar system. But that's not right either. Technically speaking, there's a point, within the center, near the center of the sun, that is the actual center at which the earth orbits around the sun. So you get more and more precise, but you bounded the answer more accurately if you say the sun is the center of the solar system than if you say the earth is. But still, you have to admit that the science isn't settled, and it isn't fully determined until we have ultimate theories of nature, and we're missing quite a large number of them. Most importantly, I touch on this in my book, the search for the unification of the laws of the very small, the quantum world, with the very enormous universe, the world of which the entirety of perhaps the entire cosmos and maybe something fantastic called the multiverse might exist.
That's a whole nother show about that. Because I was so interested when you touched on that in other interviews, and I could, it's mind-blowing to me. When we talk about this idea that science is not settled, that there's always to keep that open mind about things that could come to be, or like you said, get more specific or narrowed down. When we think about science meeting spirituality, so much very similar conversation about the science side of things. So much of what I was taught growing up in the church is like, this is faith, this is what we believe, period, end of story. There's no, you don't explore anything else. This just is how it is, right? And so you had another quote that I loved that said, scientists should at minimum be agnostic. When we talk about science meeting spirituality a little bit, what did you mean by that?
So I think that, as many people think of science and religion as either being, capable of identifying the ultimate goals of each, in other words, scientific religion or religious scientism, I actually think they're quite distinct. And, for many years, I kind of subscribed to this notion that Stephen Jay Gould, the late great evolutionary biologist, said. And that was that, these are two non-overlapping spheres of influence. And, I think that harkens back to a notion expressed by none other than Albert Einstein, Nobel Prize winner. He said science and religion. He said science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. Now, Einstein, basically at various times is agnostic, atheist, and a believer, depending on who you quote. So no matter what side you're on, you agree with Einstein at one point or another. But I think this quote is actually an important one. And, I don't like to appeal to authority, let alone appeal to Nobel Prize winners specifically. But I think this quote is sort of telling whether or not he fully believed it or maintained it. This is very much close to the end of his life, just about a year or so before he died. And it means that, if you don't have, I actually would invert it. He says science without religion is lame. I think, when you look at it, religion without science is blind, is what he said. I think it's the other way around. If you don't have an interest in science, you shouldn't really be all that religious. Or put it another way, if you're religious, you should want to know more about science, because it may be the only avenue that you have to see God's, handiwork, if indeed there is a God, then to pursue the essence of scientific truth seeking. And too often I hear these really, almost disheartening statements that people who are religious will say either, I believe everything in the Bible is true and the Bible is essentially a science book to them, or they'll say, I'm not good at science. So, I'm not going to pursue it because I'm just not good at science. And that's part of the fault of scientists, I say, number one, because scientists perpetuate this rumor that, this misconception that we are infallible. And because we're infallible, someone who is fallible says, well, I'm fallible, so I can't be a scientist. So to say that they're not good in science is really a cop-out if you're religious. I think there's plenty of great books out there. There's one above my head that I could recommend at Losing the Nobel Prize, which, and many, many other authors. I can recommend a dozen or more that are written for the public. And that's some of the best writing that there is. And some of the most exciting writing that exists is science for the layperson. And so you don't have to be a scientist. I don't expect you to enroll in my PhD classes, but I do expect you to have a curiosity about the inner workings of science, because as another Nobel laureate said, Richard Feynman, that mathematics, in fact, is the language that God speaks.
That's really interesting, and it's really neat because you see so much in the news now of things like sites being uncovered that were spoken about in the Bible. And it's so funny when those articles are posted or those news stories are posted, because people, I think both on the science side and on the spiritual or religious side, people, what they know is what they know, period. They get excited about it, and they
promote it. Yeah, that's a phenomenon.
So much of people's personalities.
Yeah, it's a phenomenon called, confirmation bias. When you only accept data that conform to your preconceived notion, that confirm your hypothesis, you're likely to slip into this blindness that unfortunately I succumbed to, and I'm very honest about it in the book. That you wanted to prove something. In my case, I wanted to be perceived as among the elite scientists of all time. And I created an experiment that was arguably one of the most promising avenues to make that claim a reality. In other words, this experiment at the South Pole called Bicep was crafted in a way, in part, to unravel the greatest mystery of all: how did the universe come to be? And also I had a side motivation, which was that I wanted to win a Nobel Prize. And the reason I wanted to win a Nobel Prize is because it's really held up as the ultimate achievement that a human being can aspire to, even more, important than, let's say, an MTV, movie award, or, so it's the highest honor on earth, not just for scientists, but for all people. That's why you see, by the way, what I love about astronomy is that it's apolitical. You can't look at that constellation over there and say, oh, that's the Democratic constellation. Oh, right. There's the Republican comet flying by over there. It's apolitical from the outset, unlike other, branches of science, or certainly in the social sciences. Now, when you see people like Donald Trump, our president, complaining that if he doesn't win a Nobel Prize, it's unfair, it just really astonished me, because, every year America gets more powerful. Every year the president is able to say that he, and hopefully someday she, is the most powerful human being that has ever lived on the history of the planet. And here this guy is saying that's not enough for him, and he would like to win a Nobel Prize. Now, why would you want to win a Nobel Prize if it hasn't been held up as sort of this deity level promotion? And I think it's quite sad in a lot of ways. And actually there was a tragic event that occurred late last month, where an economist, a brilliant man, Professor Weitzen, Weitzman, and he was arguably responsible for a finding that did result in the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences, as the Nobel Prize in Economics is now called. And the reason for that I discuss in my book. Anyway, Professor Weitzman committed suicide just about a month ago. And the reason that he did, in part, according to the New York Times and his colleagues, was that he did not win the Nobel Prize last year, and he knew he wouldn't have a chance to win it. And certainly now, as posthumously, they don't award prizes anymore. So it's just tragic to me. And there's many, many examples of this in history where people have aspired to such great heights. And actually, just yesterday I typed in, just for fun into Google, I typed in Greta Thunberg, and then the next autocomplete suggestion was Nobel Prize. Now, this young woman is doing an incredible, thing, and she's doing phenomenally in terms of, promoting this cause and getting people interested in it. In a year, she's accomplished a tremendous amount. If you agree with her, you don't agree with her, but that then is the imprimatur of excellence, and whether or not the Nobel Prize is awarded to her. I feel like it's sad and an indicator that this Nobel Prize has become essentially an idol that people worship because of perhaps a lack of spirituality in their own lives. Maybe that would be something that would address that.
Did you learn anything about your own spirituality through this process of being in the space of wanting that Nobel Prize?
Yes, of course. I actually wrote this book, and in the book, there's only 3 chapters of the book about the Nobel Prize, and the other 10 chapters rather about cosmology and what it's like to be a young scientist, and those chapters detail a pursuit, though, that was in part guided by this worship, this adoration that I had as a young scientist for winning the Nobel Prize. And that was in part generated by the extreme veneration of people who had won the Nobel Prize. From, people talk about Einstein, and they talk about, these great scientists of all time, Watson and Crick, et cetera. And you have an inescapable notion that is impressed upon you from your very first years of a graduate school education, that the Nobel Prize, you're taught all the Nobel Prize winning experiments. You're not taught like the paths that people went down mistakenly and didn't result in a Nobel Prize. It's kind of like, I've heard it said, history is written by the winners. And I feel like this is a shame, but I'm very candid in it that I was under the allure of this prize that I venerated since I was a young man, in part because I wanted to win one to prove to myself and actually to my father, who was also a scientist, that I was better than him. And I'm candid about that. But now I see it, as sort of a shallow pursuit that was driven by this near idolatry that I have for the Nobel Prize back then, and no longer have, because I see it as a religion. I see it as something that has all the trappings of a religion. It has a founding father. It has a founding myth. It's awarded on the day of the founder's death, Alfred Nobel's death. It's born out of his profits from creating the most deadly substance at the time, dynamite. And it's has a high priesthood, kind of a Vatican assembly, the Swedish Academy, and holidays every year when it's awarded. And then last but not least, you literally bow down to accept a gilded graven image that bears the likeness of Alfred Nobel. And I feel like I have a religion, I don't need another one. Most people, now that they see me as an apostate, they say, well, you have sour grapes. You didn't win it. It's not that great. And I say, you could offer it to me and see if I accept it. And if I do, I'm a hypocrite.
Right. Right.
No, I'm just kidding. I don't really think about it so much anymore.
Well, I mean, you're obviously still continuing with the work that you talk about in the book, right? The the project that the work that you've been doing. So it's not like you didn't get it and then you had a tantrum and and went away. You only in the time writing the book, right? Just a little mini tantrum.
Yeah, that's right. I felt like I had to get this off my chest. This is sort of a catharsis.
So who would the book? It's the book like for someone who, wants to know how to not win a Nobel Prize, or who would the book be best for?
Well, actually, I wrote it for a young person or an old person, somebody who's, has this in the back of their mind that this is the way that science is done, and this is what determines if you're a good scientist or not. And actually, the highest praise I ever received was from a young woman. She wanted to be an astronomer. She went to a very prestigious school for as an undergraduate, and during the middle of it, she had some trouble, and basically, I believe her father said to her, "Well, it's obvious you're not going to win a Nobel Prize," meaning that she should really quit now and find a different major because she couldn't be a good scientist unless she won the Nobel Prize. And she said, "Brian, I wish you had written this book 10 years ago. It would have changed my life." And I said, well, hopefully it'll change some other version of your life, a young lady, a young man who is, told the way that I was, that to get tenure, I have to win a Nobel Prize, to get to the top level of promotion, to get a parking space guaranteed at the University of California, it requires that you win a Nobel Prize. It's really amazing that we name streets after Nobel Prize winners. We name buildings after them. On our city in San Diego, there's an intersection of Nobel and Le Bon, which is Nobel spelled backwards. Wow. It's just unbelievable how much emphasis is placed on this award given out by primarily 400, men in Sweden that determine who gets it every year. So where else would you really look to the opinions of 400 guys from Sweden?
Yeah. How, if a young person were to come to you today and say, I think I'm doing something good, but I'm never going to get a Nobel Prize, I'm never going to win an Oscar, I'm never going to, get these big awards, I'm never going to have a street named after me. Like, why would I even bother? What would you say to that person?
I would say it's not really, it should not be the source of your happiness. Most people, no matter what it is, you don't get into the promised land unless you're the New England Patriots. You don't get back and back and back to the highest level of your profession. I mean, look at it. And even in the Nobel Prize. So there's only been 250 or so Nobel Prize winners in physics. Guess how many of those have won the Nobel Prize twice?
None. Maybe
one. And guess how many Oscar winners have won the Oscar more than once? It's like 50. And in fact, I think maybe it's Greta Garbo or Rita Hayworth or somebody like that won it 4 or 5 times. And it makes sense because, if you're the excellent person in your field, you're going to continue that. But they have some way that they don't allow, for example, people like Einstein from winning the Nobel Prize, sometimes even once because he was Jewish, as I talk about in the book, but also because, and they were very anti-Semitic and Aryan in their proclivities back then. But nowadays they want to spread the wealth around so that they can increase the power and influence of their, as I call it, essentially monopoly on this award that has become the greatest allure to scientists in humankind.
Yeah, it's there's so many different things that I want to talk about, and I know that we're running out of time, but I would love for you to take a moment and share with everybody what you're working on right now. And also you've had something new going on with your book recently, right?
Yeah, the book came out in paperback just yesterday. So today's the first day of the full publication, which coincides with the beginning of a spring in Antarctica, which is kind of cool. And this it became a #1 bestseller again in its category as a paperback. So I'm really excited about that. I didn't write it, I didn't make lots of money, but the thing about writing books for the public is something I always wanted to do but never thought I could. And by putting my mind to it and by carving out time and with the help of a very supportive wife, I was able to accomplish something that had been a childhood dream. Actually, it wasn't even a dream because I didn't think it was possible to do that and be a professor and try to be a good father and husband. So, doing it was sort of the work of a lifetime. And I put a lot of effort into it because I don't know if I'll ever be able to write another book. I want to leave everything on the page. And it's a self-help guide in a way people have described it to me, in that it really teaches people how to cope with things that could be humiliating, but instead to learn from them so that they lead to humility before the universe.
I love that. So what are you working on right now? What's your big project?
So the project that I'm blessed to be the leader of now is called the Simons Observatory. It's a collection of what will be eventually 8 telescopes in the Atacama Desert of northern Chile at an altitude of about 17,000 feet above sea level. It's just like being on the surface of Mars. It's one of the highest and most remote places that you could possibly go to. And for us, it's an ideal place to build a successor instrument to the Bicep instrument that's the subject of losing the Nobel Prize, and that we learn the lessons from Bicep, very painfully so in my case, but nevertheless, we are indebted to it for teaching us this great path forward. So we're basically building very similar devices to what Bicep built originally and using them to avoid the perils and pitfalls of the earlier experiment. And so this will come online hopefully in the next 3 years and should be returning exquisitely precise information about the origin, evolution, and composition of the universe.
Awesome. Is there somewhere that people can go to follow that project to see kind of what's going on with it?
Yeah, so we have a website, which is simonsobservatory.org. But I also want to extend a gift to your listeners, or potentially. I frequently update subscribers to my mailing list, which you can get at briankeating.com. Maybe I'll put a link to it. And I want to give a gift to 5 random subscribers that join my newsletter. And if you use hashtag Dugas in your last name as your fake last name, I will randomly select people to win a genuine piece of space dust that's 4.3 billion years old.
My kids were so excited to get there, and they call you're the guy with the coolest business card ever, by the way.
Yes. Thank you. So I will send that to your listeners who subscribed, starting now. I will select 5 of them at random and select them for receiving this meteorite that's 4.3 billion years old and is really the villain of losing the Nobel Prize.
Awesome. Well, we the villains are fun. That could be fun, you guys. Make sure you take advantage of that. Like I said, especially if you have littles at home too, they're going to be excited to get their hands on something like that. My kids were thrilled it really is fascinating. I've heard you tell a story about how you got into loving the universe and studying what you do, and when you were little and you woke up and you saw the moon and then found out later that there was a planet there too. And and so I think I hearing your story, I looked back on my own childhood and said how many times I looked up and was fascinated by the stars or the moon. And I used to go to the planetarium in Mystic, Connecticut, and spend so much time in there as well. And so it really is fascinating as a child. And I love that you've taken that love and just clearly run with it. With something amazing. So I want to thank you so much, Brian, for being here today with me. And everybody, I'm going to make sure to put all of the links that Brian has talked about in the description of the video or audio, depending on where you're watching or listening. And it will also be on our website at thebreakthroughshow.com. And so final question for you, Brian, what's harder, studying cosmology or raising children?
Well, they both give me a lot of experience with dark matter, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Brian, for being here. Thank all of you for watching and listening, no matter where you're tuning in from. Make sure you continue to comment on the episode or rate and subscribe if you're watching on one of our podcast channels or listening on one of our podcast channels. And we will be happy to interact with you there as well. We will see you Friday on a regular edition of the Breakthrough Show, where we're going to have Blake Fly on. He's an 8-time TEDx speaker. You're going to love him, and he may be doing a little something special for us on the show as well. So make sure you tune into that. Thank you again, Brian, and we'll see you guys next time on another episode of The Breakthrough Show.